Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Wednesday Night Live. Rabbi Jacobson. And the topic is facing fear. Building what our enemies want to destroy. The obvious connection to our times is very clear because we're living in a world which has suddenly become increasingly volatile. Maybe it's not becoming, it's just revealing itself as that. Both in Israel and abroad, the rise of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic attacks on Jews. You know, who would believe in the 21st century? And of course in Israel, these completely out of the blue attacks number last week, the synagogue, stabbings, and so on. And in truth, when you think about your life, you know, hopefully everyone's blessed and things go well, but we live in a world that is a hostile world, and very often we encounter, each of us, our own hazards. So when you think of it, there's an expression in the Talmud, in Yerushalmi, it says, Kol hadrachim becheskat sakana, which means all the paths, all the roads are assumed to be dangerous. Because as soon as you go on a road, on a journey which is not inside your own domain and in your control, you never know what will come your way. So thinkers and psychologists have written about this, that in a way fear is one of the dominant elements in every person's life, except for some people it's more blatant and revealed than others. But the fear of danger, the fear of death, the fear of mortality, and so on. Now, especially if you grew up in an unsafe home, in a dysfunctional home where you didn't feel safe for whatever reason, so then clearly when you get into the world, you grow into an adult, you're surely going to feel a lot of fear. And though it's an invisible force in our lives, you know, no fear, nobody can see fear, it's an invisible enemy, but it is a very powerful toxic toxin that affects much of our lives. First of all, nobody likes to admit that they're afraid. It's not macho, it's not, it makes you feel even weaker. Secondly, even if we are afraid, many of us are not even aware we're afraid, and very often we avoid real decisions because of this fear. And so we don't even get ourselves into positions where we can even make real choices because we just play it safe. Many people stand the fence, or they stay in their comfort zone as much as they can, because they don't even want to get into a place where they can experience failure and take the risk. And this is, no one can really measure the amount of energy that we invest in dealing with fear. You know, I've met people who feel that fear is the driving force of most people's lives, in their lives. And again, because it's invisible, and it doesn't speak loudly, it doesn't manifest like in a, God forbid, like a cancerous way, it's very silent, it's hard to even estimate how much fear plays in our lives until you're tested. You know, when you're suddenly facing a big decision, or you you may have to make choices in your life. Very often, as I said, we make choices that don't put us in a position where we may get hurt or we may fail. And of course, you have to always go back, the culprits, the usual suspects begin in our own homes, in our families. You grow up in a fearful home, inevitably you're going to have fear in your life, unless you work on it, of course. If you grow up in a courageous home, meaning parents who acted courageously and made choices, and you saw that they were not afraid to take a risk, even though they may have failed, or etc., you're most likely going to have that tool in your arsenal. As I always mention, children are the best version of us. Meaning, as we were children, you can see much more the more perfect specimen that we were before we became jaded and affected by all kinds of other forces. Like, you know, think of it like the freshly fallen snow that didn't fall in New York today. So, you know, that freshly fallen snow, when you wake up in the morning and you see this white that covers, there's a certain innocence and purity that we can identify with. So in children, you see children are technically fearless. That doesn't mean children, they always want to have their parents around, they want to have a validation, But they don't have fears because they have not yet developed the fears that parents or adults or the world imposes on them. I mean, the classic example, the textbook example, is anyone who's been hurt in a relationship. Most likely, next time they enter a relationship, will be far more careful. People who have really been hurt, they've been betrayed, lied to, some way violated, some way trust has been broken. So the next time they enter, they go much more wary, they have their guard up. And if it happens a number of times, you begin to just avoid real commitments, and you put up walls. So the question is, how much armor does each of us wear in our daily lives? Hopefully we have some people that we can let our guard down and we'll be a little more comfortable. But the fact of the matter, most people have a lot of thick layers of armor because of either because we've been hurt or we think we could be hurt, and life experience, especially as I say, I go back to childhood. If you grew up in an unsafe environment, there's no question that your instincts will be to always have your antenna up. You don't know when the enemy is where the enemy is lurking, and when you will be attacked next. So fear is a force in life, a tremendous force that probably has more impact on us than we may even ever imagine. So I want to talk about that because, especially, we can live lives where that fear does not emerge, because more or less, if you find yourself your comfort zone and you find yourself your comfortable place, and you're not challenged and you don't face any particular peril or any particular danger, so you could ride through it. But then suddenly something happens, you start seeing how people panic, how they respond when there's suddenly seeming danger, and so on. I was in Israel last summer when there was the war in Gaza. Israel is a small country geographically, in the sense that it's the size of the state of New Jersey. 6 million Jews are there, and surrounded by millions, hundreds of millions of enemies. People don't want them there. So you would think that it would be a country that people are just constantly paralyzed and frozen in fear. It's not at all the case. It's a thriving country. Again, it's not like the United States. The United States, Israel is one state, the United States, New Jersey, one of the smaller states. The United States, God forbid, something happens in one part of the country, there's a whole other country, it takes 6 hours to fly there. In Israel, 6 hours, in 1 hour you can 2 hours you can fly from one corner of Israel to the next. So you'd think that if it's surrounded by enemies, which America is not, Canada, Mexico, and so on, you'd think that the people would be in a state of constant panic. I live in Crown Heights, and anytime, today it's different because New York has changed, but I remember many years ago, 20 years ago, before Giuliani, so anyone says, you live in Crown Heights and you're not afraid to walk the streets. In general, how people talk about New York, that they think that now there's crime everywhere. As I said, kol hadrachim b'cheska sakana, wherever you go, there's a possibility, there's crime. Look at a city called Ferguson that nobody even knew of, and suddenly it's up in flames. So there's danger everywhere if you want to find danger, if that's what you think about. But the question is, how do people find the ability to have the presence and the composure to be in a place which is literally was under attack? When I was there, the rockets were flying, and even now, look what's going on there in the streets, and still be able to maintain normal lives. So there's a lot to be said about studying people under duress and how they deal with these type of situations. Obviously people growing up in a very spoiled environment and they've never been challenged, and so first time their comfort zone is rattled, in some way they begin to panic and they run and so on. But then you see people who have been through a lot of hell in their lives, and they've seen a lot, and develop a certain inner strength that you can gain a lot of strength from. I think about this a lot because you're aware that Jews have always been composing books. We're people of the book. Throughout history, there's no generation that did not leave an enormous amount of literature. And that never stopped. From Moses all the way down till this day, every generation had its writers, its scribes, its authors, and so on. Moses wrote the Torah, of course, the written Torah, the Torah scrolls. And then in the following generations, they always wrote, and they wrote, especially when they started compiling the Mishnah and the Talmud, the Gemara, which was orally passed on, but then it finally had to be documented or else it would be lost. So began a whole series. You look at the Talmud, And you see, it's people who committed to the words. We cherished words, we cherished ideas, and we cherished documenting it. So we didn't just leave children and students, we also left documents. Tremendous amount of material. Every generation. First the Tanoim and the Amoraim, and then went on the next generations. And each one with their own style. The generations that become later the codifiers, like Maimonides and the Rosh and the Rif, who codified the Torah. And then on and on and on. Commentaries on commentaries. Rashi, the Ramban, I'm just mentioning the most basic names. And that's been our story. But I think about it, today, to sit and write a work, a written work, takes focus, and it takes concentration, and it takes calm. You can't be writing a book in the middle of a war when you're running for your life. So this is the thing I want to point out. You look at most of these works, think Rashi, the Ramban, you read their brilliant commentaries, their lucidity, and even their poetry, and the way they compose words. I mean, Rashi himself was like a tremendous linguist in the Hebrew language. Gave us a whole language, how he writes in his Hebrew, and Maimonides, of course, as well. And the others, you'd think, when you look at the documents and you had no idea what they were living in, you'd think they were people living in a very free, democratic society. They had a lot of time on their hands. They could sit calmly on a beach or a beautiful view and write. Rashi wrote commentary on the whole Bible, but almost on the whole Talmud, whole Tanakh. This takes hours. It takes years of writing. It wasn't just a small little commentary. When you really find out the fact that when you look into their history, they were all writing literally in the middle of a war. The pogroms, the crusades, times of Rashi, they were literally running for their lives. No one knew when the next attack on Jews would be. So you have to wonder, how could they have the presence of mind to sit in wherever they were in a room, knowing that their children are at danger, they are in danger, anything can happen. It was not a type of stable world. You're dealing with anti-Semitic violent forces that can barbarically attack any time, and they did. Rashi was lived in Worms in times of very bloody times where they're burning books and so on, and burning Jews at the stake, and be able to have the composure to sit and write a commentary like his. As just one example. I'm talking about hundreds upon hundreds. One person you could say, okay, he was something special about him. And you have to wonder, today there's a thing in literature in universities, when they take literature, there's a so-called way of studying literature is called decomposition. It's decomposing literature by, every writer conveys, even whether it's fiction or non-fiction, conveys a certain sentiment. And decomposing is trying to understand what environment and what kind of personality and home this writer grew up in. And by looking at the characters and his moods and so on, you can decompose and try to have an understanding, called deconstruction actually. But some people call decomposition, because decompose has another meaning, which is not so, a little more morbid. Deconstruction is the key word I was looking for. So you deconstruct by, okay, here's a construct, and now by deconstructing you can strip the layers and try to understand, and you could find out tremendous insights. Entire books are written on who Shakespeare was. Whether he even existed is another question some have. Or other writers, and you could pretty much figure out a lot about their lives, because here and there, people write about what they saw. So like if you were to write something about what's going on in New York today in 2014, it's inevitable that you're going to be describing the streets you see, the moods, the politics, the vibe, the mood, etc. So with that type of approach, you would think that somewhere in these books you have somewhere the anguish and the panic and the fears that these people like Rashi and the Rashba and the Ramban and the Bali Taisvis and so on in Europe and even in the Sephardic countries were experiencing. And you find none of it. You don't find any bemoaning. You don't find anybody whining or sighing. Sometimes you just would see someone would write something and say, somewhere they would express their anxiety about what is happening around. Now there are obviously Abarbanel and some others who did write about. They actually wrote some of the history of what was going on around them, but their commentaries are extremely completely unaffected by their environment, and it's a very fascinating observation when you think about it, because you don't find it common. Very hard to imagine that somebody who's in some type of fearful or dangerous situation should not be expressed in anything that he's written. Is very strange. Then they were not in denial. They clearly knew what was going on in their worlds, and yet they had that ability. So I believe there's a lot of strength and insight we can learn from what made them tick. Where did they have that from? As I said, they were not naive. It's not like they were also quite aware of the fears and the dangers, and they, I'm sure, protecting their families as much as they could. And yet they had this presence. So where does it come from, and what can we learn from it, especially in our times? In a strange way, the freedoms we experience today actually, in some way, has spoiled us. So our threshold of pain is far lower than people before us. I remember my grandparents, and I'm sure any of you, if you knew your grandparents or great-grandparents, who went through pretty harsh times, whether it was in Eastern Europe or in Russia or other countries of that nature. So their threshold for pain was very high, to the point that they didn't talk about a lot. Many of them kept everything inside. Very different than we are today. A lot more talking going on. Not necessarily good talking, but talking. And also they had a high threshold because they didn't expect much, I see like the generation after the Holocaust, the people who came first to America, their objective was to just rebuild their lives. They weren't looking for achieving great growth. It was just, if we can just survive and show that we've survived and rebuilt our lives, that was an achievement, because for them, they're almost destroyed. So they had a lot of resilience, and it's interesting because at the same time, of course, it's the greatest blessing to be able to give your children a calm and peaceful world, that you don't have to be running from your enemy. I remember my father sharing with me, and so often, about the fear that reigned in the Soviet Union when he was born in Moscow in 1934. So you're talking here Stalin, Joseph Stalin, who, if any of you are familiar with his pathology, he was a psychopath who happened to running the largest country in the world with the largest Jewish population. Some people said there were 10 million Jews in the beginning of the 20th century in Russia. Who knows? Many hid the fact that today many Jews are emerging that their parents never told them they're Jewish because they didn't want them to suffer discrimination. But whatever it was, Stalin was a monster, a literal monster. He was able to kill his own son and then go sleep peacefully. You don't find psychopaths like that very often. He was a good match for his counterpart in Germany. Both similar personalities. And who knows that people say 30, 40 million died under him, except it wasn't as documented as the Germans did it. So you're talking about also his whole philosophy was one of fear, to drive fear in everyone. This was not as a side. This was the position he took. So he put people in high positions and then killed them. So everyone could know how much fear everyone lived in fear, from the top down. And it trickled down to the whole society. My father told me, literally, you went home, you woke up in the morning, fear was the dominant feel in the entire sentiment in the entire country. You didn't know, he broke down all the loyalties. Usually we're protected a little from fear in the oasis of our own homes or communities. Your brothers, your sisters, your parents. He even broke that down because he made it very much a policy to get everyone that you can to become an informer. Can you imagine you can't even trust your own brother or sister? The natural person you would always trust, your parents, children, grandparents, because they would torture you and they would threaten you, and they say, if you become an informer and tell us what others are doing, we'll leave you alone. Which of course wasn't true. Like Churchill famously said, that appeasement is like feeding the crocodiles in the hope you'll be eaten last. Everybody wants to save their own skin, and that's what happened. He broke down. I'm not saying everyone succumbed and everyone surrendered, but this was a person who literally controlled, and fear is a very powerful force because everybody's always afraid. So that way he kept people under control, and it was really a miracle that he died in 1953. And some say he was poisoned, but he was such a powerful entity, and he had they have the Stockholm syndrome of a battered wife who keeps returning back to her husband. People cried in the streets when Stalin died, even though he was a monster, because they became so dependent on him. Anyway, and there's books about this, documented his whole, as I said, pathology. But fear was the driving force. And my father told me about how They would go to sleep and they wake up. Everywhere you walked, you didn't know who's following you, who's watching you. It's hard even to imagine. I'm hearing it straight from my father. I grew up here in the United States. To me, it was like a story. I mean, I believed him absolutely, but I couldn't put myself in those shoes because you go to sleep at night. I know I'm in a peaceful home. I'm in a calm home. I have parents that love me. They care about me. No one's knocking down our door, and that's that. So it's very hard to imagine for us who grew up in freedom, so to speak, to have that type of sentiment. But it was clearly there, and I saw it. I heard it and I saw it. And yet my father was a very courageous man, as many people in that generation were. And again, it goes back to the question, like, how do you deal with that? So God forbid we should ever turn the clock back. But we have our own fears today. Frankly, sometimes it's laughable what we're afraid of compared to what our grandparents were afraid of. Today people are afraid when they don't have the right iPhone, or they're not being accepted in the particular society they want to be accepted. Fears today take on sometimes very superficial meaning. But nevertheless, we still have fears, and many fears, because even though we live in a more comfortable and, yes, less threatening society, we live in a world where we can protect ourselves and we can prosecute someone if they discriminate, etc. But psychologically, there are many fears today, and I would submit even maybe some of them are even harsher than they were back then. We'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. So there are many lessons that can be learned because fear drives most of our decisions. Maybe another word for fear would be insecurity. Insecurity. It drives our decisions. It drives our lives in many, many ways. And so let's talk about that. And I'm going to talk about it also in context of the chapter in the Torah that we're in right now. And that is the chapter of Vayetzei. Because if you want archetype, a role model of an individual who was facing fears, this is the chapter where you have it very, very loud and clear. Even though there are references earlier, Abraham, Isaac, but here it's stronger. So what's the story? The story behind, what is the story of this week's chapter? Vayetzei Yaakov meBe'er Sheva vayelech Harana. So right there you have immediately the opening of the chapter. Jacob, after so-called stealing the blessings from his brother Esau, as well as in the need of finding himself a spouse, is sent by his parents back to Isaac's original home in Haran. They were living in Be'er Sheva. Be'er Sheva is a city in Israel. And therefore Yaakov now goes off on a new journey. Vayetzei Yaakov, he leaves Be'er Sheva. Vayelech Harana, he goes in the direction of Haran. The word Haran, we learned earlier, comes from the word wrath. Charein af shel mokim. The wrath of God. Wrath, anger. Because it was a place that incurred the wrath of God because it was a very non-divine place. And yet, it was the place where Abraham and Isaac and here Jacob, all they go back to find the daughters of Haran. They had the special qualities. So Haran is the wrath. We'll soon get back to that. So Jacob begins his journey, he embarks on his journey. It says that he lies down to sleep at a certain place. Later we find out it's the Temple Mount, where all the activities going on today, the controversies and battles. So the Temple Mount right here, and he lies himself down. It says when the sun sets, and then he has a dream, the famous dream of Jacob's ladder. And the Torah continues that the ladder was planted on the ground with its head, the top of the ladder going up into heaven. Okay. And then he dreams how God comes and stands above him and says to him, I'm the God of your parents, of Abraham, Isaac, and the land you're resting on right now is I will give to you and your children. And this is where God tells him the famous blessing of Faratz the Yom of Akedma, that your children will be like the dust on earth, in a sense, will multiply and expand and grow to the point of proliferate, that you will spread from the east to the west, from the north to the south. And all nations will bless, all families of the nations will bless themselves by you and your children. And God says, I will be with you, I will protect you in everywhere you go, and then you will return to the land that you are here. Because he was on his way to Haran, away from Israel, and he's going to come back and return. Okay. Jacob wakes up from sleep, realizing this dream that he must be in a very special place. He's disturbed because he didn't know that he was resting on the Temple Mount. It says, Vayira. He was afraid. How awesome is this place? So you see fear. And then he continues on, and he says to God, he takes up himself an oath, vows, and says that if you will be with me and you'll protect me, I will commit my life, Vashafti, and I will return. I am now making my commitment to you. So clearly Jacob knew he was going away from a holy place, and he was going into a world that's going to be very challenging, which indeed it became. And where does he go next? God grants him the promise. And where does he go? He goes into Haran, and that's where he ultimately spends 20 years. 20 years, this chapter takes place over a period of 20 years, where he builds his family and home, but with great heartache and pain. Like he tells later, Lavan, his father-in-law, is a crook, not just a crook, a very malicious. We say in the Haggadah, actually, that Lavan in some ways even worse than Esav, and even worse than many other men, because he wanted to destroy Hakol, he wanted avid Hakol, to destroy everything. And Jacob has to suffer under his dominance for these 20 years. But at the same time, this is where he builds his family. And after the 20 years, Jacob finally makes his way back. At the end of the chapter of Yaakov Halach Darkei, he goes on his way, and he returns with the family. All his children were born there except Benjamin, who would be born later in Israel. And that's the story, in brief. So of course, the obvious question is, like, why did it have to happen in Haran? Why couldn't he just do all this in Beersheba? So the technical reason is, as I said before, that as Rebecca, his mother, said, go back to the place where I come from, and we'll find the daughters there have special qualities. But nevertheless, why in Haran? Why have to suffer like he suffered? And you'll find later that Jacob in general, his whole life was a life of suffering. That even later when he returns to Israel and everything seems to be calm and peaceful, which we'll discuss when we get there, then Joseph is sold by the brothers into slavery. Jacob thinks he's dead, but later, the end of his life, Jacob tells Pharaoh, when he says to him, how old are you? He says, I lived short and painful years. Because as opposed to his, which was 147 years, as opposed to Isaac and Abraham, Jacob suffered greatly. And yet, it was Jacob that built really the Jewish nation. Because the Yud Beis Shvatim, the 12 tribes, from which all Jews originate today, were built here in Haran. So it's interesting, it happened in the place of wrath, such building. And as I mentioned, you'll see constant references to fear and to strength and protection and so on and so forth, both in the dream and then afterwards when he speaks to God. So if you really want to have like one of the first places where you find how someone deals with fears and difficulties, it's this chapter. So what is the story here behind the story? So the Orach Chaim, commentator, at the beginning of this chapter says that the Vayetzei Yaakov leaving Beersheba and going Harana is actually the story of the descent of the soul into the body. So this is Orach Chaim, who usually is not necessarily such a Kabbalistic or Hasidic commentary, but it's like a Hasidic commentary. But he says, it's the descent of the soul. The soul originates in Beersheba, which is the fountain of 7. So if you're familiar with the spheres, there are 10 spheres, but there are 7 emotions. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, Malchus. We say, L'cha Hashem, Agdula, Gvura, Vatiferes, and so on. And these 7 emotions, which also correspond to the 7 times 7 days of the counting of the Omer, 7 days of the week. There's many references to the number 7. This year we're in a sabbatical year, Shemitah, which is the 7th year. So 7 is a cycle of time, is the cycle, the structure of existence is defined by 7. And it originates in the Hasidic and Kabbalistic Hasidic language in the 7 spheres of Atzilus, the 7 emotional divine attributes, from Chesed to Malchut. And that's where all souls originate from, the fountain of 7. You may have heard of this, that when we go to sleep, the Medrash puts it this way. The scientists will tell you go to sleep, so your cells get regenerated, refreshed, revitalized. The Medrash says that when a person goes to sleep, Kista de chayusa, a certain element of like a very minimal amount of energy remains with you. And the soul goes back, it says, to the fountain above to drink waters and refresh itself for another day. So again, the reference to fountain. So the fountain of 7 refers to the source of where the souls originate. As a matter of fact, in some places it talks about the 7 branches of the menorah, another 7 branches of the menorah. Chanukah as an 8th, which has its own reasons, but the 7 branches, that each neshama, each soul, associates with one of the branches, which means there are souls that are more chesedic, souls that their personalities are more giving. There are souls that are more gvuridik, they're more disciplined, more measured. They're souls of teferet, compassion. They're souls of netzach, ambition and determination. They're souls of hoyed, humility, yielding. And you have souls of yisod, bounding, and malchut, which is dignity. Now, everybody has all 7. But the question is, there's sometimes a dominant gene, so to speak. So there's a dominant element of personality where you can tell where the soul originates from. So the fountain of 7 is the origin of the souls. And where does that go? Vayelech harana, when God decrees that a soul comes down to earth, that will be the moment that we are conceived and then born 9 months later, is Vayelech harana. Vayetzei me Beersheva, the soul leaves that fountain of 7 and it goes where? To a dark world. This world is a world of harana. Shama beguf, a soul comes into a body where there's physical needs, where there's material needs, there's death, there's mortality, there's illness, and there's of course the hostility of dog eats dog type of attitude, survival of the fittest, a world where people are not necessarily kind to each other. So it's the antithesis to the fountain of 7, Beersheva, the 7 fountains or fountain of 7. The antithesis is Charana, and not just Charan, but Charana with a hay. So this signifies, the Orach Chaim says, the soul's descent from the highest, the Igra Rama, from the high part of heaven, the Bir Amikta, to a deep pit. And this world is called a dark world. Sometimes it's called Alma de Shikra, a lying world, a deceptive world, a world where there's duplicity, where there's deception, where there is potential for all crime, for all injustices that human beings perpetrate against each other, war and so on. So this is the descent. And Jacob's journey, therefore, is symbolic and really telling us the story of our own lives. So you can imagine a soul doesn't want to come down to this world. Why would it want to come to a place like this? Just like Jacob didn't want to go to Haran. Because it's living in its comfortable environment. It's drinking from the waters of the fountains, 7. Why in the world would it want to come to a world where it's full of struggles, difficulties, pain, hurt, and so on? But al karcha chatachai, the Mishnah says, God says to the soul, I know you don't want to go, but you must go. I compel you to go because this is the place where you're going to accomplish the purpose of existence. As long as you remain in the comfort zone of heaven, in the spiritual realms, drinking from the spiritual waters, which is what a soul wants to do, study Torah, do its thing on a very spiritual realm, you will never really, number 1, actualize yourself, because you won't be challenged. And number 2, you will not change the universe, which I need you to do. So there a soul comes down to earth against its will. That's why it says in some Sfarim, it says that its baby cries when it comes out of its mother's womb, because for one moment it sees the world it's entering and the world it's leaving. So who wouldn't cry if you saw that contrast? And then the womb closes, and now the soul is now on this side of the world. It's this side of the curtain. And now it begins its difficult journey. Inside the mother's womb, the Talmud says the soul is taught the entire Torah. Now that's it's made to forget on a conscious level. And now begins the arduous journey of Charana. But here's the catch. Specifically and explicitly, in this world of wrath, in this dark world, is where you have the power to build a family. And where of all places does Jacob build his mitoshe shlema, his complete family, his wholesome family, is in Haran. Because when you go into a place like that and you're challenged, it brings out your greatest strengths. You read the Tzorech Aliyah, every descent is for a greater ascent. And the transformation of Haran catapults you into places and propels you into places that you could never have achieved in the comforts of Be'er Sheva. And this is the place where Jacob becomes a great man. And the same is told to each of us. The soul initially doesn't want to go, and even when it's on earth, it always resists engaging. But this is the place where this world is where you will be able to transform the universe and bring out the best of your capacities. So it's precisely the place that's so challenging that brings out the strongest, our greatest strengths. The question, however, is, how do we manage that? And you see, even Jacob was afraid. And God promises him that I will be with you, and if you do what you have to do, I will give you all the strength you need, which touches upon the real rule, which is Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba betrunoya im briyeisav, and Ein HaMevakesh ela lefikecha. God does not expect something from someone that they don't have the capacity to achieve. It would be cruel for anyone to send someone on a mission knowing they can't achieve the mission. How could you do such a thing? So the mere fact that we're here gives us a vote of confidence that you can do it, which means that there's no challenge that will come in our lives that we cannot overcome. So, like I mentioned a number of times, if someone said to you that you have one request you can make of God, what would it be? And you don't want to waste the opportunity. So many people say, I've tested this, I want a life without pain, a life without suffering, a life without any anxiety. No, of course, some people immediately ask for money or health. So even though it sounds a very good request, like, a life that will be free of any type of challenges or pain, but besides that, it's not realistic. Is that really the greatest blessing, that you should be avoid and not be able to not avoid any trouble or so on? The greatest request you can make to God would be, the wisest request would be, as King Solomon was offered this. So he says, give me, God, the strength and the tools that whatever comes my way, I can overcome. So think of a good swimmer. A good swimmer, you could say, you know what, my blessing I'd like to have is that I will swim many waters and I should never face any obstacles. Or is a better request to be made that whatever obstacle I face, I have the ability to work around and figure out. Think what the difference between the two. The first one is what a child would ask for. Just give me a life that doesn't have any challenges. And the second one is actually the ultimate blessing, that whatever comes my way, I have the power to deal with. That's a tremendous blessing. Because then you're guaranteed that whatever happens, you can handle it. The first blessing is going to keep you in a very type of like an isolated or insulated environment. So it's like staying in your mother's womb the rest of your life. Yeah, you won't have any challenges because she'll do everything for you. It's a far greater blessing to say you'll be in a world, there'll be challenges, and you know what? Nothing can destroy me, but that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger, and I have all the tools I need to face anything. Very often when counseling couples, new couples, so people ask, like, what should I be looking for when I'm dating in my spouse, in my future spouse? So obviously there's all the common things, the basic things that we all know. A person with good midas tevas, good disposition, kind, trusting. Obviously someone that you have attraction to. There's a whole list that you can find. I'm not talking now external. I'm talking about priorities, foundational elements. But there's one thing that always strikes me, that when you say it, people right away immediately relate. See, no one knows what the future holds. You marry someone, who knows what the future holds? What kind of children you'll have? What challenges will come your way, financial or otherwise, health issues. And everyone should be blessed, everything should be smooth, but life is full of curveballs, and anything can happen. So you could say to yourself, how do I know this is my spouse? I don't know what we'll be like in 10 years from now when, let's say, we face a challenge. We need to move, we need to find a new job, we have a different crisis or some important transition, there's a loss in the family. But here's the way God made it very wisely. You cannot know the future, but you could tell and have an instinct, if you're just basically honest and have integrity, that the person that you're looking to marry, you're looking to be your partner, you can tell whether this is a person, whether when anything will come up, I'll be able to resolve it with that person. that we both can sit down and put our heads together, and necessarily bring in somebody else, resolve issues. So even though you don't know what those issues would be, but you can tell whether this is a person that is a partner in that way, or they're not. And it's a very good litmus test whether you feel that type of trust. So even though we don't know what's coming ahead, but you're asking the blessing that whatever happens, I know I can handle it because I have your partners with me. Just using it as an example. So what exactly does this mean? This means that's not that life is going to always be nice to us. There's going to be challenges. And again, we always bless that things should be b'tei v'anir v'nigla in a very obvious, revealed, blessed way. But it's inevitable. That's how life is. You get older. The way it works in this material world till Mashiach comes is that grandparents and those that are older than you will pass away at some point. And that's always a traumatic experience. And there'll be other challenges. Challenges of parnosa related to finances, health challenges, people get older. Sar gidul banim, the pains and the challenges of bringing up children, and each child with their own needs, and children can get themselves into all kinds of situations, and then of course trying to marry off children. All this is fraught with all kinds of kol hadrachim b'cheskas sakana. It's full of sakana, everything. She could be cowering in a corner and be terrified every morning what's going to happen with my children, what's going to happen with me, or you are blessed with the ability to say whatever comes my way, we'll know how to handle. And we hope for the best, obviously, but we have the power to do what needs to be done. So where does that power come from? This is what Jacob asked God, and that's what he was granted. And as our grandfather, Jacob, our ancestor, the blessings given to him are given to each of us, because as I said, Vayetzei Yaakov mi Be'er is not just Jacob's journey, it's our journey. Each of us right now is on a journey. First of all, the journey that your soul came down to this world, whatever part of the world, whatever home or family you grew up in, wherever, everybody has this journey. And then there's the journeys within the journey. How many journeys we take? There's the journey, some people say marriage is like a second Yuri Descent Hashem Baguf, a second time the soul descends. And there's all the journeys within the journeys that we physically take, the places we will travel to or move to. And there's the journeys, our psychological, emotional, and spiritual journeys as we grow. And we travel down the path, the twists and turns that life presents every one of us in their own way. So all this is the story of Jacob. As I've always emphasized, the Torah is not a storybook from past events. As a matter of fact, in the Zohar, Parsha Ba'alescha, there's a very, very strong word that if anybody calls the Torah a book of stories, the Zohar uses very harsh language. It's not a storybook. It's not a history book. It's not a book about Jewish history. It has history in it. It has stories in it. It's a story. It's a book of my life. It's your life and my life. The Torah is called, why is the Torah called Torah? Hira. The word Torah comes from the word Hira, directive or guide or instruction. Torah also comes from the word light. Torah In Aramaic, the word for Torah is Eraisa. Eraisa. Eraisa, the Zohar says, means Yaisa. It carries light. What is light? When you're traveling on a dark road and you have no headlights, you don't know where you're going. What the light does? The light doesn't create anything new. It just shows you where the road is. You can sit in a dark room. There's chairs, there's tables, there's steps. If there's no light, everything is there. It's all intact. Nothing changes. The light just simply says, don't bump into the table, don't fall down the steps, God forbid. Light illuminates and gives you clarity. So we live in a world where it's a dark world in the sense we have no clarity. Someone will say to you, what path should I go on? How do we know? We're not fortune tellers, we're not prophets. The Torah sheds light. It's like a light beam, a roadmap and a illuminated one that directs us how to travel the journey of life. Torah's Chaim, Torah of life. And therefore the stories and episodes and narratives and characters are our story. So Vayetzei, the idea of the soul descending in the body, as the Or HaChaim says, truth is every narrative is your story. And that's why the Jews in Torah were inseparable. If it's just a book of stories from the past, why would they sacrifice their lives for the Torah? I know it's important to have the story of our past, but there's a Torah scroll, there's a lot of Torah scrolls. But the Jews never saw the Torah as a book. They never saw a book of stories, even true stories. They saw it as a life itself. They saw it as a child. We dance with it on Simchas Torah. You never find any professors of literature dancing, not with Shakespeare and not with other works of literature. They read them, They study them, they pore over them, they analyze them. They don't dance with them. And they also not going to run into a burning building to save them. You know, a book is a book. It burns, we'll find another book. The Jews is known, God forbid, when they burned the synagogue, they'd run in to save the Torah scrolls just like you would save a child, which is a pretty interesting phenomenon. You know, you could say there's thousands of other Torah scrolls. It's not like it's irreplaceable. There's other Torah scrolls. It's not the only last Torah scroll on earth. And it's only a book. It's a scroll. Because they never saw the Torah scrolls as being just a book. They saw it as being their lives. My life. My chayenu ve'erech yamenu. As the Talmud tells the story, when the Roman asked the sage, Rabbi Akiva, there's different versions, you know, why Jews cannot survive without Torah? No 3 days pass that we don't read the Torah. So he answered with the analogy of the fish in the sea. The fox comes over to the side of the water and says to the fish, you know, you live in the water all the time. Why don't you have a little fun and come a little change of climate, change of venue, come out on the land. Obviously the fox was looking for a good meal. So the fish said, they say the fox is such a wise animal. Doesn't look like you're very wise. We can't come out. Our water is our sustenance. It's not just we hang around in water because it's a nice venue. It's our life. So that was the answer. That Torah is like our water. Chayenu v'erech yamenu. And just like it says in Halacha and Jewish law, you cannot live 3 days without water. You can't go 3 days without water. Therefore, every 3 days we read the Torah. And of course, 3 days is the minimum. We drink water more than every 3 days. So Torah is kfiyas sitim Torah. It's one of the only mitzvahs. It's a mitzvah tmidi. When every free moment you should be studying Torah. Why? Not just to keep you out of trouble, because Torah is like water. It's like oxygen. You're never going to ask a question, why should I breathe all the time? I'll breathe once a day or something, or once a week, or once an hour. Because something that's sustenance, you do it, you want to do it. It's your love. In the Torah, we're given the choice. It's our sustenance, but God says, you know what, I'm not going to let you feel it's your sustenance. So now you have to work at it. You have to make that choice. So when you read a story about Jacob and his journey, it's our story, your story, my story. And you just have to fill in the blanks and apply it. Because each of us have our own charan. Obviously, wrath or the challenges. Each of us have our own fears. So ultimately, as the Mayor Premishlan, there's a story with him when he was traveled once to a city, and in the cold winter months in Russia, it was very, very slippery slopes. But he had the custom, as many Chassidim do, to go to the mikveh every day, and of course before Shabbos. But no one went during the winter in that city because it was very slippery slopes. The mikveh was at the bottom of a hill, and you couldn't really make it. He was the only one that went, and he was not a young man. So some of the skeptics would wonder, how does he make it? So they once followed him. And they realized, yes, it's pretty miraculous because you can't walk those slopes. They're very icy. But he made it. And then he'd come back intact as if nothing happened. And after they asked Rabbi, they asked him, how is it that he was able to do it? So he said, "Am zugebunden eben fällt man nicht unten." When you're tied above, you don't fall below. And this becomes a classic line that can be analyzed forever. What does that mean? It means that, yes, we live in a world of slippery slopes. It's not that some people don't fall because it's not slippery. It's slippery, but they have something to hold on to. When you have a rope from above, and you hold on to it, so even when it's slippery, you have something that doesn't let you slip, doesn't let you fall. And I've told the story, the Blazhener Rebbe, they say, I think, he was during the Holocaust. I told the story many times here. I'll say it fits here. So he was in the camps, unfortunately, as were many of his Chassidim. And in one particular camp where they were, the commander of the camp, the Nazi, everyone had their own achzarius, their own cruelty. And he had this game he liked to play, quote unquote. What was the game? He had the Jews dig these wide trenches. And then he would have them, whoever jumps over the trench lives, whoever doesn't is shot right on the spot. Target practice. So they're about to start the game. The Chassid says to the Rebbe, his Rebbe, he says, enough of this misery. Let's just let ourselves be killed and end this hell. And that's that. Instead of all this torture. And the Rebbe said to him, as long as God keeps us alive, we have to do whatever it takes to fight and survive. Okay, the game began, quote unquote, the game. And in the big havoc and mayhem, nobody knew what happened, who died, who didn't. Well, they both actually survived, but they didn't know. Then a few months later, the camps were liberated. They were all liberated. And they meet. Suddenly, to each of their surprise, they both are there. So the chassid says to the Rebbe, Rebbe, you're not a young man. How did you make it? How did you jump over that trench? It wasn't an easy thing. It was a wide trench. So the Rebbe said, I closed my eyes, and I held on to the kapota, which is the coattails of my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, and it gave me the strength to jump. And the Rebbe said to him in return, what about you? How did you make it? You're also not so young. So he said, I held on to your coattails. I held on to your kapota. So there's an expression they attributed to Newton, Isaac Newton, which is that nonis al gaba nok, that we're like midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. The truth is, he's not the source of it. It's the Jewish sources that precede him. What is the idea? He used it with science and so on. It's really the idea of the humility that anyone that has knowledge knows. The knowledge is not created. We stand on the shoulders of those before us, and then we add a little. So a midget is far, far shorter than any giant. But standing on the shoulder of a giant, the midget can see further than the giant. So there's this expression, nonis al gaba nok, which is essentially the real truth, the real power of Jews. We always understood that history was like a marathon. I should say not just a marathon, what do they call it? Like a relay race, where every generation, it passes on the baton to the next generation. You ever see how the relays go? They pass on the baton. That's why we call it seder hishtalshelus. Hishtalshelus is like links in a chain. Links in a chain. A Masorah that goes ish mipi ish, teacher to student, parent to child. And you'll see in the Torah the emphasis of it everywhere. Shalavicha ve'agetcha, Passover Seder, the holidays. You pass on to your children. Now, to us, maybe we take it for granted because it's something we grew up with. Of course, chanech l'nar, we educate our children. V'shenantam levanecha, it's the basis of Judaism. You don't pass it on, where the legacy will die. But it wasn't always seen that way. Even the Jews at Sinai, when God said, I want a guarantor for the Torah, I'm giving you my greatest precious treasure, chem de gnuza, give me collateral. That's what God said. So the Jews first offered the Ovis, the patriarchs. They're pretty good collateral. Then God rejected that. Then they offered the Skenim, the older sages. They offered the prophets. There's a few versions. They offered all the greats, and God rejected all these collateral. And then they said, "Banenu arevim ba'adenu," or "Banenu arevim ma'isanu," different gersais. Our children will be our guarantors, and that's what God accepted. Now, what they didn't understand that. It's obvious why God accepted, because the children is the future. Because it takes time to think about it. Abraham. There's a verse in the chapter Vayetzei, a few chapters back. It's a tremendous verse. I find it to be one of the most powerful lines when you really pay attention. So God is about to destroy the city of Sodom. And the Torah suddenly reveals to us God's thoughts, which is not very common. God says, "V'hamachasa anima Avram." He was considering not to reveal to Abraham that Sodom would be destroyed. So God says, should I conceal this fact that I'm going to destroy the city from Abraham? It's interesting. Why? Here's a man, this is what God says. Here's a man that dedicated his life. Here's a man that committed his life to that his children and his family that follows him will be dedicated to justice, virtue, charity. And I'm going to conceal from him my plans. This is a verse in the Torah, which is interesting. Why is God telling us? Why does he have to tell us what his thoughts are? You want to reveal it to Abraham? Reveal it to him. Why do we need to know that he had a consideration? Not and then yes. Because this commitment that Abraham made is the greatest commitment that a human person ever made in life. I'll show you by contrast. You could really appreciate it. Look at the greatest people in history. We ask people, who's the greatest philosopher? The secular world, we're talking the whole world. Who's the greatest philosopher in all of history? Almost everyone says Aristotle. Okay, who's the greatest English writer? Shakespeare. The greatest emperor? Julius Caesar, Alexander, whatever. The greatest empire in general, the Roman Empire. You have all kinds of greats, measured by their power, their control, their wealth, their armies, whatever it may be. Where are their children and grandchildren? Where's the Manashi Yitzhavas Bonov as Beis Achrav? Where are they? Why did Aristotle, who was a brilliant philosopher, not see it important that his children and grandchildren should perpetuate his philosophies? The answer is because when you're so consumed with being a genius, you don't have time to diaper children. It's a nuisance. I'm busy contributing art to the world, poetry, philosophy, science, and I don't have time for children. Children are a nuisance. They say Rousseau, one of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, and he was already considered to be not so decadent like Voltaire and others. So they say that one day he took his few children, I think 7 children, put them in the city square and said, he abandoned them. He was busy philosophizing. He's contributing and changing the world. He has no time for children. Which is a common thing you'll see with artists. They're narcissistic and very selfish. They may be geniuses, but it's about them and their expression to the world. They're God's gift. And what was great about Abraham, greatest of them all, he was a philosopher just like all of them, and maybe greater than them all, a thinker, a spiritualist, all the qualities which you can see. And yet, he had the humility. It was not beneath him. He knew that as great as I am, it's meaningless if my children don't continue it. And in history, you don't find many people who did that, as much as it makes sense. Even today, you don't find it. I'm sure every parent loves their child. But people do what's good for them, and then their children have to dance along. And Abraham made a great sacrifice. As great a teacher he was, and I'm sure it's much more comfortable to sit and just study and pray and speak to God. No, he spent time educating his children and lowering himself down to their level, step by step, the baby steps that it takes to nurture, educate, inspire a child. Which you could say to yourself, you know what? I can get a babysitter to do it. I can get a nurse. I'll let me be a great thinker, a great contributor. That was why God said, now, a man like that is ready to do that. I cannot conceal my plans from him. And this is the key, ultimately the key, that chain, that midgets on the shoulders of giants. That's why the first thing you see, what does God say to Yaakov? He doesn't just say, I'm here with you. He says, Hashem nitzav Elovi Ani Hashem Elokei Avram Avicha Elokei Yitzchak. And what I will give you is the land to you and to your children. Right here, he's telling him the story of eternity. This is the rope that the Rebbe there was holding on to, his grandparents, parents and grandparents, and the Chassid was holding on to the Rebbe. The rope of Meir Mishlan that when you're tied above, you don't fall below. I always tell the story, it's back to Soviet Union. The previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, lived in the harshest times as well. In 1927, they decided, the Bolsheviks, to arrest him on charges of counter-revolutionary activity, which meant basically being Jewish. And spread Jewish. And remember, arrest then meant instant death, and definitely no due process. There were no defense attorneys. It was only prosecutors. So he was in great danger. But he writes in his diary, which he actually calls Masechta Gehenim. The diary he writes in that period is called the Tractate from Hell, because it was hell that he went through, the torture, etc., etc. But he made a decision in his own heart, he said, that he could not disgrace his parents and his grandparents and Judaism, that even though nobody's watching, he will do whatever it takes to go out of his way not to cooperate. He insisted, I want my talis and tefillin. And you're talking about a place where they kept telling him, do you know you're in a place where you don't ask for things, you're told what to do, and you don't tell us what. And he insisted. He refused to speak Russian, though he was fluent, only Yiddish. His captors actually were Yiddish communists, which were in many ways far more anti-Semitic than the non-Jewish communists. It was called the Vayetzei. These were the Jewish Communist Party. They saw religion as being a poison, that they were going to eradicate in every possible way. So there's a whole many stories, fascinating stories of how he would speak Yiddish to people whose grandparents were Hasidim of his grandfather. So you can imagine the dynamic. Among many stories, there's one that always jumps out as a most powerful one. So he refused to speak Yiddish. When they would come, they would come to read him something. They said he has to stand and rise in honor. He would not rise. They asked him once, "Do you know where you are?" Meaning you have to respect where you are. He says, "Yes, I'm in a place that's pater from a mezuzah." That was his answer. A place where you don't need a mezuzah, which essentially is either a stable or a bathroom. This was his defiant stance. So then finally one of them became exasperated, and Yiddish said to him, put a pistol to his head. He said, "Rebbe, enough games, and enough this stuff. This thing here, this pistol, has changed many people's minds. It's time to start cooperating." And the Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, he said, this tzatzke, which means this toy, can just schrecken emetzer was hat ein Welt und asach getter, nicht emetzer was hat ein Gott und asach Welt. Which means this toy can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. Now this was not like some type of nice, cute statement. You're talking about here, he could have been shot in a moment. This was not, nobody was watching. But that's what he said. If you think about the line, you could see there the secret of how Rashi and the Ramban and all the greats were able to not have fear even in the face of the greatest enemy. Because they tied themselves to something that took them and transcended them and transported them to another time and place. When you have one God and many worlds, so nobody wants to die, obviously. But I have one God, but I have many worlds. It's like what they call in investments, it's called diversification. You have many eggs in many baskets. You take away one basket, I have another basket. There's Elam Haza, there's Elam Haba, there's another Elam Haba. There's many levels. You can't frighten me with taking away my physical life. Because I have a spiritual life and I have other dimensions of life. Someone who has one world and many gods, yeah, you take away this world, it's all over. I was once on a plane and I saw a guy literally I was sitting in the aisle, the guy was right across from me in the aisle, the plane's about to take off, he's trembling, a tough looking guy. Didn't stop trembling. So I thought, something's the matter with him, whatever. So after the plane finally is up in the air, and he calmed down, he told me, he says he's terrified every time a plane takes off, since he's a child, So I said to him, so don't fly. He says, no, I have to go. I said, what are you terrified of? He says, death. Death is the end. If I die, it's all over. So I said to him, why do you think everybody else in the plane doesn't know that we could all die? But I saw it was like just a symbol where most people in the world who so worship the material world, death is symbolism of the end. Now nobody wants to die, God forbid. People want to live healthy many years. It's a bracha, arichas yamim shonim tevis. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But to say that the fear of death should cause a person to change everything about themselves, not someone who's tied above. And you'll see this consistently. And it's not just a nice line. As I said, those authors, those commentaries, as I mentioned, Rashi, the Ramban, they had the composure not because they knew exactly what's going on in the world around them. Absolutely. But they were able to connect themselves to something that was not of here and now. And when you connect to that, you have like a rope and you transport it to another place. And that's the story of all those that were able to overcome fear. We'll later read a number of chapters from now where Moses, of course, faces the greatest enemy of all, Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh is called, in some of the verses, called Tanin Hagadol, the great serpent. In the Medrash and Kabbalistic writings, it talks about him as the Reish, the head of all the klippas, the source of all negative energy. So God tells Moses, you are going to confront Pharaoh. So there's a chapter in Boy where God said, where the pasuk says, Boy el Pari, come to Pharaoh. So the Zohar asks a question right there. Tremendous question. What do you mean, boy? Everywhere it says, Lech el Pari, you go to Pari. What do you mean, come to Pharaoh? And the Zohar answers, because when Moshe Rabbeinu had to now confront the real Pharaoh, this was after the 7 plagues, And you're talking about some very serious, the last, trying to break the resistance of this Pharaoh who was the superpower of the world, and spiritually speaking was a true enemy, a sorcerer and of a lot of powers. So Moses began to tremble. He's afraid to go. So the Zohar says, Hashem says to him, okay, boy, come with me. I'll go with you this time. Other times when it was not so dangerous, he said, you go. Now he said, I'm coming, come with me. You're coming with me. And then Moses calmed down and he went and did what he had to do. This idea of that you know that someone's with you is the power to overcome every challenge. You know, people wonder why the 12-step programs are so successful. They're not necessarily scientific. They grew out of the grassroots and didn't even grow out of necessarily philosophy. It was like a thing that caught on, and it's proven itself to be successful. The key to it all is because of the power of the synergy of a group. Really, it's a Jewish concept, vayakel, kehila, the power of synergy of a group. When you are suffering and you meet someone else who suffers, and you both together can communicate, it gives strength. You think, 1 second, why? Misery loves company. We should both be even more suffering. With someone else that's suffering, you both become more in pain. There's some strength in numbers, and that's why the idea that you know someone's with you, even if you go through the harshest situation, it gives you the strength. Look at someone in a hospital, God forbid, has no visitors, no guests, no relatives, no gifts. What happens? That person is more likely going to die quicker than someone else who has guests and visitors. Why? Because you start giving up on yourself. There's no one that cares, so you stop caring as well. It weakens your immune system. Whereas somebody who has people who love them, who come and show that love, it gives you strength because you feel there's other people, there's someone that cares about me. You can say, why would caring help your immune system? Because that's what it does. We live in a lonely world, existential loneliness, and when you know there's someone that's there with you, it's like throwing that rope. It gives strength. You see this like time and again. People who've gone through serious addictions, almost nothing works. But if they go into a group of others that have that type of addiction, it's not just they see that others got through it. There's some power that happens that we give each other. I remember years ago when we were a little crazier here in the Meaningful Life Center and not as mature, but actually I thought it was a good thing. We used to do these weekend Shabbatons, camping, real camping, the real stuff. Not camping, just like barbecue or something. And we'd go, a few hundred of us would go. We found these camping sites and we did camping, etc. And it was usually around Shabbos Nachmu, the summer. And it was not an easy production to do. You have to have an outdoor caterer, and you have to have tents. It's a serious job. I'm not going to go into the whole history how we got there. Trust me, camping is not my thing. But I saw the power of a group of people coming together where there's no defenses and there's no walls. And there's a lot of strength to that. And anyone who came to it still reminds me that it was like a really transformative type of experience. But I remember we had a staff and a team, a lot of people never camped before, so they need help to pitch a tent, etc., etc. And there's, of course, rain is always a reality. So I remember when we were planning the event, so we had always people, because you never know, someone comes and they're in a bad mood or it's not working out. You need people to console them. They can't disappear suddenly. It's the middle of Shabbos. Where are they going to go? So there's one woman who came, and from the moment that she arrived, everyone saw there was going to be trouble here because she was complaining about everything. And I know when I said woman, it sounds sexist. It could have been a man, but it happened to be a woman. What should I tell you? I'm not going to change it just to be politically correct. Anyway, she was like, everything was a problem. And we had a staff of very professional staff, people who worked with her and tried to help her. But nothing was good. Where the tent is, the weather, the food, everything was a problem. The water. So finally, it ended up on my plate because nobody could handle her. So I went to speak to her. And I just, was being nice and kind. And I said, look, we're here together. We're all in the same boat, so to speak. We were, actually almost was a boat because it was raining. And we just got to do the best. And we're here for each other. Whatever you need, we're here. And no one here has 5-star accommodations. We're all in the same situation. I saw she was not satisfied. So I said, look, do whatever you want to do, makes you comfortable. You need anything, let us know. You can come to the meal, you can come to this, we'll bring you something, whatever it is. Anyway, what more can you say? The next day came, and she came, I remember, to the reading, we davened, the morning prayer, and then was the reading of the Torah. And I shared a few words before the reading of the Haftarah, and I said, it was Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, which is the first Haftarah after Tisha B'Av, and it's the first of 7 Haftarahs that are consolations, Shiva de Nechemta. And the first one says that the prophets come and say, Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, my nation be consoled, be consoled. Consolation. And I asked the question, there's a famous Avud Raham, he's one of the halachic commentators, codifiers actually. So he quotes a medrash, a psikta that says that the 7 haftarahs after Tisha B'Av are like a narrative. That it's like a developing narrative with a sequence. That after the temple was destroyed, the prophets come to console the Jews. And then the Jews come the next week and say, to God, why are you sending messengers to console us? You destroyed the temple, you come yourself and say, I'm sorry. And then finally God says, that God actually comes and says, okay, I will console. So I asked the question, why does God have to wait for the Jews to ask? It's true, God was the one that destroyed the temple. Let him come and say, I destroyed the temple. Why is he sending messengers? So my response was, I said, sometimes that God can console us is obvious. He created us. We can have pain, and God consoles us. What God gave us is a greater gift, that we can console each other. That human beings have the ability, because we're all mortals. How could one mortal console another mortal? We're all in the same. We have all the same flaws. So usually consolation should come from someone that has more strength than you. But we all suffer in many different ways. So how could one sufferer console another? And that's what God gave the blessing, Nachmu Nachmami, that a person can console. For example, the mitzvah of visiting the sick. Right? We visit the sick, and it says that when you go visit the sick, Bikur Chaylim, you take away 1/60th of the illness of the person that's sick. So I remember as a child, I asked my father, he once took me to visit someone in a hospital, and he told me about the 1/60th. So I said to him, so does that mean that if you visit them 60 times, they'll get healed? Or 60 people visit him? So my father smiled and he said to me, when you get older, you'll understand. It's usually answer, then you get older and you realize that nobody understands. Okay, I guess that's the answer, whatever. So, of course the answer is that, but it still says so. So what does it mean exactly? Well, it means what I said before, that there's something that gives strength to another person when they know you care about them. We may not understand how it works exactly, but caring for someone strengthens their immune system. It strengthens their hope, their confidence. They fight more. That's how it is. You see it in sports. You see it in health in so many ways. Sports. You have a coach. You have even fans. You say home field advantage. Why is it so powerful? Because there's something about your own people giving you strength and get your adrenaline going, however you explain it. So that's when I said, God, Nachmu Nachmu, that we can console each other. So let me tell you what happened next. After the reading of the Haftarah, or the end of it, this woman was there. She was sitting in the back, the one that I was saying nothing was going right. And she comes over, she asked me to speak to me. So I went outside with her. Outside there was a central tent where there was, we davened, mechitza and so on. And she said to me with tears, she said to me, I want you to know that what you said now is changed my life. See, my son died on Shabbos Nachamu last year. Her little boy. It's his first yard site. Who would know? And I realized the night before that it was nothing we did. She was definitely, something was bothering her. So all you can do is be nice. And she said, and I'm so tortured, I'm destroyed over it. I came here just to escape. And you guys were all nice, and everybody said, but you didn't realize, I guess. So I want to apologize for how I behaved, but you have to know I'm unbelievable pain inside of me. But what you said now actually was fulfilled. We do give each other strength, and you've given me strength, and this whole Shabbos has given me strength. So it's not that it solves the problem, but it gives you strength. Like I said before, the blessing you want is not there should never be any challenge. Halavai. That if you do have one, know that you have the strength to deal with it. And that's what we can give each other. So this is when Yaakov heard this. and all the stories I mentioned before about being tied above, standing on the shoulders of giants, you'll see anywhere, anyone that survived and is able to truly forge ahead because they knew they were not alone. Whether it's God is with you, or it's your family, or it's your ancestors who may not even be here physically, but they're thinking about you. So they pull you out. You hear many stories, say by a chuppah, by a wedding ceremony, that several generations of grandparents come, their souls come. There's different versions of it. Why? Because God will never deprive the parent from the greatest joy of all, is to see their children marry, or grandchildren. Because it's the ultimate reward, that whatever you did in your life, even if it wasn't an easy life, you see your grandchildren, you see great-grandchildren. That means that something I did lives on. And what greater nachas can someone have than that? Because then you're ready to endure anything. The challenge is when you think everything I do is going to die with me. There's no one that cares. There's no one that knows. But when you see that generations continue, then it's unbelievable, because it means that whatever I did, I'm able to tolerate anything if I know that something lives on. And also vice versa. When we look back and we connect to that which came before us, it's a tremendous source of strength. And it's not, I'm not getting now into the whole neurosis. It's exactly not what I'm talking about, of people who saying, I go to Yom Kippur, I do Yiddishkeit because I don't want to break my parents' heart, or grandparents out of guilt, and so on. That's the negative side of it, where you become demoralized and guilt. I'm talking here pride. Something knowing that you're part of a marathon that has been being run for thousands of years in an unbroken chain, and you have the merit to be here today to carry on that little step, that leg of the journey that is yours and yours alone. And God forbid, the future and the past is dependent on you, because you're the link between back then and what happens next. This is only Jewish people can say that, because our ancestors, starting from Abraham, knew that power and they made sure to pass it on. So does that mean that we don't have challenges in life? Of course we have challenges. You go to Israel, look what's happening there. It's horrible. What happened last week. It shakes us all to the core. But we don't get weaker because of it, because we've been around, we've seen the abyss, and we've knew how to hold on to something stronger. We say it every time in the Haggadah. We say the Vihi Sha'amdalanu. This Vihi Sha'amdalanu. What does Vihi mean? And she withstood everything. She stood up for us. It's Vihi. It's a vague Vihi in the feminine. That what? The B'chol Dor V'Dor, in every generation they came to destroy us. Not just the Egyptians, all of them, every generation. And yet we were unvanquishable. It could not be destroyed. So what's the Hi Sha'amdalamna? What's the Hi? So there's two different commentaries. They say He refers to the promise, the Haftacha, that God promised that you'll make it. And even though it may take generations, but you will make it. Or He is the Amunah, the faith. They're connected to each other, the faith in the promise. But it's interesting, it says that like one word, Vihi Shamdalanu, that thing, that faith, that promise holds on, because that gives you the strength and the courage to keep on going. And that is essentially why Mashiach, the concept of belief in Mashiach, is not just some type of nice superstitious or fantasy. It's essentially understanding that the journey of life will come to realization, that the prices you pay to be a virtuous, good person, and the prices that our parents and grandparents paid will not be in vain, that they will bear fruit, and there will be a day when it will be realized in reality in this world. Take away that realization, then the question is, so what's the war for? What are we fighting for? It's never going to end. We all know the story of anyone studying the Vietnam War in the 60s. I don't know if any of you remember the Vietnam War. So the Vietnam War is an interesting study. United States, the largest country in the world, the greatest army, could not conquer a fifth world country, Vietnam, who didn't have weapons. They fought with bamboo sticks. Explain that. How could an army like the United States not conquer them? And the main reason is because any American soldier that went there had no idea what they're doing there. And you can have all the weapons in the world if you have no belief in what you're doing, or you don't even know what you're doing. If you asked any American soldier, why are you fighting this war? Not really sure. I was drafted, they told me to fight. What's the goal? So most you could say it's to stem communism, because in the late 50s there was the fear that it would be a domino effect and communism would control Southeast Asia. As if who really cares, so let them control it. But that was the thing. And above all, it was a war that had no end. Like, what was the objective? War, you tell me, okay, I'll fight because we're going to conquer, defend ourselves against Hitler, who he wants to kill us all. Okay, very legitimate war. Or war to conquer this, to conquer that. You cannot fight a battle. Frankly, you can't even run a business if you have no objective, you have no mission statement. In the olden days, there was a custom, some armies, when they would go to march to war, they would sing a victory song. A victory song. You didn't even begin the battles. Why are you ready marching victory? Because it was the confidence to know that you can win. And when you have confidence, it's half the battle is won. You still have to fight it, but you know you have the strength. When we go into Rosh Hashanah every year, so we wear white during the high holidays. So the Tur writes, why do we wear white? Because in the olden days there was a custom when you went to, when you were in judgment in court. So if you were afraid to be guilty, you wore black. Black was the sign of guilt, and white is a sign of innocence. So the Medrash asked the question, so 1 second, we're not even beginning to, it's before Rosh Hashanah, how do you know you're going to be innocent? Why are we wearing white? So the Medrash says, and the Torah quotes it, and says, that this is a nation, Israel is a nation, a unique nation that knows ufya shal umazu. They know the ufya, they know the personality of God, and they know that they're going to be victorious. So therefore, even before they begin the judgment, even before the court opens, they're already wearing white with total confidence. This comes from the strength of generations and from the strength of faith that's more than mortal. It cannot come from regular mortal strength because mortals are, everything is temporary. So where can you get such strength that you know you can endure anything? That's a divine strength that's passed on in generations, and you see it in the power of that power. So at the end of the day, in the final analysis, it works like this. This world is filled with things to be afraid of. The people who overcome fear, or you could better say, do not have that much fear, is not because they're naive or they don't know what the dangers are that are lurking, is because they have in their arsenal something to counter it. They have in their arsenal a focus, a power that is tied above, and therefore they don't fall below. I personally witnessed this in Israel. It was interesting to see during the Gaza battle. So everyone was high alert. Everyone knew what was going on. Missiles were, rockets were shooting. You have no idea where they were. Could be a siren in Yerushalayim, a siren in Tel Aviv, definitely in Ashdod and Ashkelon, the whole areas. And yet there was a certain calm among everybody. It had, to me, it was very reflective of the Jewish ability to ride through anything. We shouldn't have to wait and rely on things like that, but it's a deep strength. I have no doubt that the reason every American regime has at least a minion of Jews in their cabinet or advisors. Why? Why disproportionate? Because Jews have a certain, besides wisdom, have a certain maturity when dealing with real challenges and difficulties. We've been around. We've been around like no one has been around. There has to be a collective passing on. Even if a person is a skeptic, you cannot deny, we have something in our family business that gives us ability to survive it all. And everybody's amazed by that. You read Mark Twain, you read Tolstoy, you read all those lines about the Jewish people. They're blown away by it. The Dalai Lama, anyone who goes to see him who's Jewish, the first question he asks, he says, tell me what's the secret of your survival? Without a country for so many years, without a nation, without an empire, without money, what's your secret? Because that's the bottom line. Everyone wants to know. And it comes down to that connection that Allah gives you the edge. Not because there's nothing to fear, but because you have something else that helps counter it. So then fear is not the driving force in a person's life. I've many times say the Jews have suffered, but they have not become sufferers. So Jacob goes on a journey. We each go on a journey. We're given the promise, not only that you have nothing to be afraid, but if you hold on to me, you'll thrive. You'll build your family in the darkest of places. And when you build a family in the darkest of places, you know that nothing can destroy it. Had Jacob built his family in Israel, you could say, okay, Israel is fine. But if he goes now out to Haran, who knows what will happen? There's a law, which is also, a lot of constitutional law follows Jewish law. So there's a halacha that says, shtar sheyotza lav irer, which means a contract that is challenged, and then it's upheld, can never be challenged again. This is the basis of appeal courts.
So you can have a verdict, then you appeal it. You can appeal it again, but there's a point, Supreme Court, you can't go further because en l'dover soved. There's no end. So there's a point, well, once it's been challenged enough times and been upheld, you cannot challenge it again. Now you think, why is that the case? A challenge should have weakened it. Because if it's challenged, now you know it can never be challenged again. It's like once you've been broken and you fixed, then you know you can't ever be destroyed. As long as one is not broken, you could say, you know what, everything is good until it breaks. But once something breaks and you've rebounded, that's a sign that nothing can destroy you. This is the ultimate story. And when you have that confidence, nothing can destroy you. It's not completely rational, it's not so logical, but it works. It's a reality. And you see it on a small scale and you see it on a large scale. In homes that where parents were insecure and they allowed fear and other external things, what others are going to say, etc., shape their lives, they unfortunately project that fear onto children. And those children grow up chasing their own shadows or chasing what other people are saying about them. People growing up in a home where the parents and the environment was secure, confident, and people felt, you can make a mistake and still, I believe in you. That type of confidence and not always have to be perfect. That develops a strength that anything that comes your way, you know what? I'll try it, I'll take the risks, and let's see what happens. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, I'll learn from that next time. I always use this when I speak publicly. You tell a joke, nobody laughs. You say, you know what, I thank you, I'm not going to use that joke again. So at least you tested it once, so next time you won't get so embarrassed. So you could always use every liability and turn it into an asset. That's on a humorous note. But the same is true with everything. Because if you have confidence, then everything becomes something you learn. There's no problem, people make mistakes. What you want to do with people is they shouldn't make the mistake a second time. You learn from the mistake. I read somewhere that IBM had hired a new vice president. He was a part of development. They gave him a budget. And he made a major mistake, which caused the company something like $30 million. Which for a company like that is not so much money, but for most of us, it's a lot of money. And he's called in by this boss. And of course, he thought, this is it. He's getting the axe. He's out. It's a $25 million mistake, $30 million mistake is not small. And the boss tells him, he sits down, he's all ready for the worst. And the boss tells him, look, I'm giving you now another department to take over. And he says, one second, he says, well, it cost us $30 million for you to have learned from this mistake, and we're ready to pay for it. And this guy ended up bringing the company so much money after that, because he learned from it, and he learned from his mistake, and it was the vote of confidence in him, that even though you made a mistake, we still believe in you. And it was the exact counterintuitive thing most of us would do. A guy made a mistake. It's an interesting lesson in education, children, and so on. Now, obviously, there's some mistakes that are bigger worse than others. You have to gauge this. But it's interesting, sometimes you give a person a strength, and they end up being far more productive. They won't make the mistake again. They'll be much more careful and so on. And they can end up doing things for you that are far, far greater. Had he been fired, he would have been fired. Okay, fine. And here he redeemed himself many times over. So the list goes on of different examples. And going back to the story that happened in Yerushalayim last week, as I discussed last week at length, our approach to all these things is, as sad as and tragic as it is, for every tragedy we have to add 50 simchas. For every negative thing we have to build. They desecrated a synagogue, and Jews during prayer wearing a talis, tefillin, and all the in the middle of worshiping God. So what we should do? Maybe they should build for that attack 20 shuls, new shuls, maybe in East Jerusalem. That would be nice. That's how Jews respond. We respond with something negative, we'll do something kaflaim l'teshiyah 1,000 times more positive. This first tablets was shattered. The second tablets, the Talmud says, it was kaflaim l'teshiyah. It gave us so much more. So that's the Jewish approach. You're familiar with the Haftarah we say on Shabbos. You know why we say Haftarah on Shabbos? Why? Because there was a decree almost 2,000 years ago by the Romans that said you're not allowed to read the Torah in public. That's what they decided. What threat it was to them, I'm not sure, but that's what they decreed. Penalty of death. So Jews are resourceful. They don't take anything just lying down. Okay, no problem. What does Torah mean? Chumash. Little they know, Torah can mean many things. Chumash. So we're not going to read Chumash, but there's Nevi'im So they found a Navi in each prophet, each book of Nevi'im, they found an episode that was similar, Me'ein HaMa'ura, similar to the story in Chumash. So you read like the Haftorah of Vayetzei, will be something, what's the Haftorah of Vayetzei? I'm not even sure. But it's something from a similar story in Nevi'im. So they ended up reading not Chumash, so Torah is not being read in the Romans' eyes. They found a loophole. So the Romans didn't achieve anything. Okay, but then the interesting thing is what happened next. What is the Haftarah of this week? Where is it? Oh, 382. So let's take this Haftarah, for example. What is it? Oh, I do remember. Haftarah Vayetzei is from Hosea 11:7. What's it about? Yeah. Talks about the tribes in Israel and so on. The tribes were born in this chapter. So they found a section that talks about the tribes. And they found, each week they found something. I don't know how the Romans reacted to it, but that's what happened. So now the decree was over. So what do? What would most normal people do? Okay, decree is over. We're back to reading Chumash. And the Haftarah is over. We don't need that loophole anymore. No. In Jews, you add something in holiness and Kedusha, you can't stop it. So now we read both. So even though the whole Haftarah came completely due to a negative experience, but you added something, so now we read the Haftarah. That's is classic Jewish way of dealing with problems. Yes, you bring more light, and then you keep the light. You know, it may have come from a negative situation, but now it's here, so we add more and we increase more. This is this typical healthy approach. You'll see it also played out in any healing situation. People who really are healthy people, there's a negative, you'll see it always make them stronger, and the strength, even though it's from the negative, remains with them. And the negative is forgotten. We don't even remember that the Romans did that today. But we do have the Haftarah. So the positive that remained from it is there. And there's many things in life. There's a loss. At the time of the loss is terrible. But the years to later, what you have a memory of is something was built instead, and now you have double, triple, and so on. May Hashem bless us all that we should have the strength, have your ropes to hold on to, which is each other, of course God, our faith, our people, our ancestors. Everybody has their yichus, everyone has their line, people who are in heaven that watch over you and protect and pray that their children should be healthy and face the least amount of challenges. But even when we have them, we always have those ropes to hold on to. And the more you build them, the more power you have in every given situation. But we shouldn't even need to use it. But in case there are times, and sometimes we all have our moments where we fall or stumble, so we know we have something that can hold you up. You know. And I want to finally say the class is dedicated by an anonymous donor. And if anybody wants to dedicate this or other future classes, you can do so online or call our office. And next week we will continue this class. Tomorrow I'm actually off to West Coast. My daughter had a baby boy this week, so I'm a grandfather now for not the first time already, multiple times. Everyone should only have simchas. When I know the name, which we'll know next week, I'll dedicate the class to my new grandson. And so we're going to go to the West Coast for that. But I'll be back here before next class, so we'll continue on. And those in cyberspace, I say I wish you all well, even though I can't see you, but I know you could see me. And everyone have a very healthy and blessed week. And no snow, huh? Okay, fine, so be it. And good, it should be a very good life. If you haven't left your email address, please do so we can stay in touch. Philip is giving his class Thursday night as he usually does, Philip Namenworth. If you want more information, just contact us. And any other way we could help, we're here to give each other ropes. We're all here to help each other, lift each other, lean on each other when we need it. And it's a mutual type of give and take. Everyone be well. Thank you.